Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Solomon, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the second in our series of Inclusivity Works Lunch and Learn sessions. It's good to see a number of regular attenders here today, so welcome again. Now today, this afternoon, the spotlight is on employing ex-offenders. Criminal reoffending costs this country something in the order of £18 billion annually. And securing employment can massively reduce the reoffending rate. But only 17% of people who've left prison have got a job within the first 12 months, only 17%. Now, as some of you will know, I work with the GEM project. We provide one-to-one support for people in Gloucestershire who are facing significant barriers to getting into work. The GEM project's funded by the European Social Fund and the National Lottery Community Fund. And over the last 5 years, we've supported something like 2,000 people in Gloucestershire, many of whom have faced multiple barriers, some of whom have had criminal records, but supported those people into work, further education and training. Now, as a result of the work we've been doing over the last 5 years, we've recently launched a new initiative, a new campaign called Inclusivity Works. And this is a fresh initiative which aims to raise awareness and support employers in recognising and realising the many business benefits of diversity and having an inclusive culture in the workplace. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me this morning Peter Atherton. Peter is the CEO of Community Led Initiatives. Peter, as we'll find out, has spent much of his early life in and out of the care system and also in and out of the prison system, before creating an organisation, CLI, that supports ex-offenders, mentors them, and helps them to turn their lives around, helps them to transform their lives and to get their lives back on track. Now, with a master's degree from Cambridge University, no less, in criminology and penology and management, Peter brings a wealth of experience in rehabilitation and working with employers to help them to reap the benefits of employing ex-offenders. What I'm going to do, if I may, is to ask you to put any questions you have into the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll work with those as we go through this session. But I'm going to firstly say thank you very much, Peter, for joining us today. And if I can, I'd like to start by asking you to set the scene, to tell us a little bit about your life story and how you've managed to get to where you are now, how you've managed to transform your life.
Well, thanks for the invite, first of all, Tony. I'm delighted to be here today and to have this conversation. I'll get to my reasons why I'm so passionate about supporting people into employment. But kind of my pathway on this journey really started out from a place of kind of significant disadvantage. I was brought up in Manchester in a really poor family, and I was in and out of the care system between like 3 and 9 years old. My mum was a drinker and I was neglected quite a lot, and there was a lot of violence in the home environment. And then when I came out of care at 9, like there was a bit more stability, but I started to feel like it was a space that I didn't really belong in when the little brother came along the way and all the attention went to him, and I thought this was going to be my family, and somebody stole the limelight from me, which I was really unhappy about. But I started to kind of play up and kind of misbehave quite soon after that. So between 9 years old and 11, 12 years old, I was regularly being brought home by the police. I was messing about on industrial estates, breaking into factories and things like that, and just being a nuisance really, rather than doing anything, you know, very serious. But there was an escalation when I started to knock about with some older guys in Manchester who taught me how to steal cars and taught me how to burgle houses. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was in Crown Court in Manchester and being sentenced with my first custodial sentence. And I was really afraid at that point, of going to prison, but how things panned out during that sentence were not how I feared they might. It wasn't as bad as what I thought it was. When I came out after custody, I noticed that people treated me differently when I went back into the school setting. So, you know, people were aware that I'd just got out of prison, and there was a kind of a bit of status that came with that. And I played up to that. It was kind of attention, and I kind of reveled within that. And between the age of like 14 and 16, I'd gone back to prison like another 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 different occasions. And the adults that were in my life at that time were, the messages that I were getting from that is like, you know, you're messing things up for yourself, you know, you're always naughty, you're doing these kind of naughty things. That had been the kind of consistent messaging throughout my childhood, really. So I was just being what everybody told me that I was. So it's only kind of as I've matured and moved away from that I've been able to reflect on things and kind of see things with much more insight into kind of what was going on within my own behaviours, but also within the environment around me. But I do remember I was in prison in Stoke, and my mum came to visit me. I was in my 5th year, and she'd said that the school had been in touch with her to say that they can't register me for GCSEs because I'd not done enough kind of coursework, and the exams, I was still going to be in custody when some of these exams were due to be kind of taken. So what did they want my mum to kind of do about that? So so I ended up getting released from that sentence like nearing the end of like the school period, like at 16, with no qualifications. And the adults in my life, like I say, telling me is like, you know, I pretty much screwed things up for myself. You know, normal routes for somebody that had as much energy as I did were kind of maybe into the forces or something like that to kind of get straightened up.
And you couldn't even get into the army because
I couldn't even get into the army because
that's pretty bad.
Yeah. So I was pretty much like, well, there's no point trying then. You know, if I'm not going to get a job and I can't get into the army or anything like that, there's no point trying. I might as well just carry on doing the things that I find fun and exciting, you know. And I was able to buy my own trainers then, instead of like early on in secondary school. You know, I'd have one pair of shoes that I went to school in, that I had to do PE in, and I had to play out in as well. That was kind of all I had. So, you know, how that affected me and kind of my sense of self, knowing that I was poor and knowing that I didn't have as much as what other kids did. When I was starting to earn money myself, I was kind of compensating for that, and that made me feel good. And so how I was earning my money was leading to a positive benefit for me, really, rather than any negative consequences. So I was just completely off the rails. You know, all my mates were involved in doing the things that I did. Ecstasy really started to hit. So this is like, you know, late 80s, early 90s when all this is kind of going on. And having drugs was also exciting and fun and interesting, and something to spend my money on, and I could get access to drugs. So I ended up starting to sell to mates and people that I knew at weekends when they wanted some acid tablets or some amphetamines or a few E's and things like that. And throughout 16 to 20 years old, I kind of, some of the friends that I was knocking about with got some bigger sentences for stealing cars and burglary, the acquisitive type of offending. And I just thought, well, there's no point doing that anymore. I might as well just kind of earn a bit what I do from kind of selling drugs. And that just kind of changed things for me in the way where I wasn't putting myself in as much risk on a frequent basis. Like each time you're going out, there's a chance you're going to get caught, but drug dealing is different. So throughout pretty much, you know, my kind of late teens to my early 30s, I was always kind of involved to varying degrees in using drugs and selling drugs. Everybody that I knew was involved in criminality in some way, or kind of drug using in some way. And the community, we had our own community around all of that. That was very separate from wider society, you know.
Yeah. So your own group of people you were very comfortable in and you had status within, but you are where you are now, which is a very, very different place, Peter. What was it that brought you up short, or what was that light that sort of said, well, this isn't going to be the way I want to spend the rest of my life?
Yeah, so I got my last prison sentence in 2001. I got 6 years, and I was released in 2004 on parole. And the friends that I was most close to at that time were involved in you know, quite serious amounts of drug dealing, and like I was looked after when I first came out, and then given a route into that when I was ready. And it was it started off a really good time. Obviously, I was celebrating being out of prison again. I was celebrating being able to have that freedom. But my celebrations tended to last longer than kind of everybody else's nights out. So I got more and more involved in using drugs myself personally. And I'd be staying up for, you know, instead of just like a Friday and a Saturday night, then it'd start to creep into the next week. Over a period of like a couple of years, my mental health really started to deteriorate with that, you know, have the lack of sleep, the lack of taking care of myself, using lots and lots of drugs that are kind of stimulants, and the paranoia that came with that. And there was also kind of some difficult kind of situations taking place within my peer group where there was kind of conflicts and clashes with other people, and that was creating a tension, but also trying to stay one step ahead of the police. So gradually, like between 2004 and 2007, you know, what started off seeming to be like a nice upward trajectory in the quality of my life, it really dipped, and it took a huge dip, and I became really quite isolated. I withdrew from my friends. I withdrew from the business stuff that I was kind of involved in, the drug dealing, and just really isolated myself and just consumed more and more drugs. And within that, my mental health just kind of plummeted to a place where I was recognizing, like, you know, all I'd done within my life is hurt people and upset people, take advantage of people. And I just got into a place that really fed some of that early messaging that I had as a kid, that I'm always bad, I'm the bad one, I'm always naughty, and stuff like that. So I just got into this kind of pattern of thinking where it was just solidifying all that negative sense of self and self-loathing and self-pity as well to some degree. Sure. And it took me to a place where mentally I couldn't see a way out of that, and I couldn't see a point of trying. So I was contemplating suicide, and there's no point being alive if all I'm going to do is hurt other people and hurt myself and all that lot. So all the relationships I had in my life at that time with like my son and my partner had deteriorated. You know, I'd got to such a low level that they couldn't help me anymore, and I was just kind of left alone with that. And that was a really, really dark place for me to be in.
So how did you get out of that? I mean, and because you've set up a business which now supports and mentors people that have been in your situation potentially.
Yeah.
How did you get out of that?
So initially it was my mum. I've got a strange relationship with my mum because the amount of time I spent in caring outside of kind of that family environment, even though it might not have been a family environment that's comparable to most other people, but my mum came and moved me from where I was living to moving in with her. So then between 2007 and 2009, she forced me to see a doctor. So I was on medication for my mental health, and I went into some speaking therapies, and I was able to kind of process really that where I'd got to was a consequence of the lifestyle that I was living, and a consequence of kind of lots of other factors that contributed to that. But it gave me then the ability to see that, well, if I start to make better decisions and take some ownership of kind of where things are at, rather than just feeling like this is fate as such, then maybe I can turn life in a different direction. So I started to, as I was at that point of healing, I recognized as well that I couldn't continue to live life as I had, and also that the people that I knew if I continued to be connected with them, that at some point I'd end up back in that really dark place where I was at. So the fear of that was a real strong driver for me, Tony. There was no incentive to change my behaviour.
Yeah.
It was a fear-driven kind of behaviour change on the back of how dark my mental health had been and how I'd kind of viewed myself at that time. So trying to build a life outside of everything that you've ever known and anybody that you've ever known was really, really tough. You know, I was applying for jobs with just employment agencies and getting nowhere. You know, when you're filling out your forms and you've got to tick the box to say you've got a conviction, and then they're asking you to list those convictions, and I'm having to ask for more paper to be able to kind of do that, you know. And I'm being really proactive, kind of phoning up, you know, is there any work, and just kind of getting nowhere with it. You know, I kind of twigged on and realised that I need to be a little bit creative about my past here. I managed to get into work by lying about my past.
Yeah.
And that was great for a couple of months, but when I'm sat on a production line, which was just like being in any prison workshop that I'd ever been in,
Yeah.
I started to ask myself, you know, is this all I've got to look forward to in life? And I felt that I had more potential. To strive for more. I'd repaired my relationship with my partner by that time, and fortunately, you know, she encouraged me to kind of explore it, and it was without her support, it'd never have happened. And that was a catalyst really to getting involved in volunteering within criminal justice and within addiction treatment. For me, there was a real kind of strong hope that I'd be able to build a new life for myself. But there was also a really kind of important influence that I wanted to make up for the things that I'd done in the past. There was some reparation in that, you know, and this seemed a way where I could do both. I ended up volunteering as a mentor working with prolific offenders, which was great because I knew them all and they knew me, and we had some really kind of good results. And that led to a grant from the local authority to be paid to probation to employ us to develop that further. So this was 2010. Over the next 18-month period, I was employed within probation as a staff member of probation to develop the mentoring project, until it led then to making a decision really that we needed to break away from that probation umbrella. Whilst it was really helpful to develop in that space, what we saw was that in order for our work to be successful, we needed to create relationships that were supporting people to be independent. And what probation wanted was just pretty much tick box stuff, be a taxi service, help people complete a form, and that was it, really transactional kind of stuff. So
you set up CLI,
yeah, which
provides mentoring and a much broader support than that. Tell us a bit about CLI, and if you can share a story or two about the people that you've worked with, because it certainly hasn't, from what I've seen, it's not a tick box service.
Oh, it's definitely not a tick box service. That was kind of part of what was the catalyst really for us to go in our own ways. That we had a belief that, you know, to make a difference with people, it needs to be more than that. So we started as a company here in 2013. It was just myself and my colleague Matt at that time. We didn't believe, we never imagined it would grow to the scale that it has. But one thing that we was really confident in was the quality of impact that we could achieve in our work. And as an example of that, there was one individual that he was a prolific offender in Manchester. He was 19, 20 years old when he was due for release. He'd been locked up as a young offender, and he was labelled as a turbocharged prolific offender. And you know, police were expecting him to last a matter of days after he'd been released from sentence before he'd committed further offences, and he was on the run again. I think he'd committed over 300 offences within a 12-month kind of period. So he was high profile, high volume offences, and it was a real nightmare. So he was referred into us as kind of like a let's just see what happens kind of thing. Nobody had any expectations, and within 3 months of working with him, he'd not committed an offence. He was stable in the community. he adjusted to getting his income from benefits, which was a real challenge for him and his sense of self and his ego. You know, accepting money off benefits was like something other people did. And he was stable in some accommodation as well, and you know, so there was real stability in his life. And it was, you know, the fact that like 3 months may not seem like a long time, but for him that was a real long time. So probation wanted to kind of celebrate that, and they did some interviews with his probation officer and did interviews with him. And like an article was released on the good stuff that he'd done, you know, with our support, but also, you know, what it took of him to kind of do that. But the article referred to that label that beforehand he would have celebrated. You know, that's a kind of a badge of status, really. Yeah, I'm a turbocharged prolific offender. Yeah. You know, so that there's like kudos in that for him. But when it was referred to in that article, he was actually really upset by it. And I think, you know, this example is one that kind of really describes the internal change that people go through when we support them. You know, they start to identify with a value base that's different from kind of where it was before. And the fact that he was embarrassed about that kind of label and recognizes that in the past he would have celebrated that, you know, that illustrated really just how significant that internal transition around self-identity, how it is, and how it's an essential kind of component of supporting people to build a new life outside of everything that they've ever known. Who are they going to be if all they've ever been is a car thief, a drug dealer, a burglar, or a drug addict, or whatever that may be? Understanding who they are from a positive frame can give them something to bind to that can help them through the difficult challenges in the future. You know, and he, you know, just the profile that he had in as offender, and just something that could easily be overlooked really in that, you know, how upset he was about a particular term being used. Language is kind of really important, but for us that really just goes to show that there's layers within this kind of journey of support that we provide that mean that people are really changing and not just behaving in a way that is compliant with society's norms.
Yeah, and I think coming on, if I may, because how did you end up going to Cambridge to study a master's in criminology and penology? I want to talk to you about, you know, the employers you met as part of your studies, and those employers that were taking on ex-offenders and their experiences. Tell us about that, how you came to do that, and what we've learned from that, and how we can share that information with the employers that are on the call today, on the webinar today.
So as my organisation started to grow, I recognised that I need to learn how to lead this for it to give us the best chance of success, sort of thing, you know. And I really invested in my own development. You know, I needed to be equipped. I had no proper education kind of beforehand, and I needed to be equipped with kind of what I need really, to make me the best version of myself that I can be. I was contacted by a researcher at the Institute of Criminology at Cambridge, Dr. Ruth Armstrong, who was doing a research project around trust in relationships with people that have had convictions. And she, in her research, she'd come across my organisation and how highly it was spoke of, and that led to the film Jogging with Jodie. That's out there for people to kind of see. That kind of really shows the nature of the working relationship between a mentor and somebody that we support. So that contact point really was my first contact point with Cambridge, and Ruth always encouraged me to kind of believe in my own potential, and she worked on me for a couple of years, to be honest, Tony, before I grew, before I had enough courage to kind of to explore it, because I just you know, just feeling like a bit of an imposter, like I don't belong in that space, I can't do that, you know, and just so getting the courage to be able to kind of do that, apply to go on the course. I had to do a piece of written work because I had no qualifications to show the standard that I was at, and I had to go down for an interview. On the back of, I must have achieved a good enough standard in my written work to be able to kind of be invited onto the course. So that was a 2-year course between 2017 and 2019. And the second year of it, we do our own research project. So obviously for me, like, I understood how difficult it is to find work when you're trying to rebuild your life after prison. And I'd always been really kind of opinionated about that, and so choosing that as a research area for me just seemed to make perfect sense. And I understood from the reading that I'd done while I was at Cambridge was that there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of robust research being completed that really unpicks the reasons why employers are reluctant to employ people with convictions, but there was very little looking at why some employers do.
Yeah. So
I decided to explore that, and my
tell us about what you found from that. What were the key things that came out of that? And
yeah, so it was really interesting to, just on a really human level, to speak to other people that saw it the same. There was something validating within that kind of saw things in the same way. And my hunch is that there's a spectrum of employers, and at one end you've got people that are going out of their way to give opportunities to people that others won't. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got those that no matter what are not going to. But the vast majority of employers are kind of somewhere in the middle. You can kind of nudge them along. So I wanted to see from those employers that are doing it, why do you feel comfortable kind of doing it where others won't? And it was really interesting to understand the motivations behind some of the reasons that employers had for kind of doing it, and the variety in those motivations. For some, it was really altruistic, you know, they've been exposed to something as a child or just socially within their environment, and felt that they were in a place where they could make a difference and give something back. I came across a term called noblesse oblige, and it's a medieval term for nobility obliges, and I kind of liken this kind of sense of, you know, if you hold fortune and privilege, that sharing it with those disadvantaged is better for us all. So there was a group of people that were business owners that were occupying that space, but then there was also kind of employers that were kind of nudged along by legislative changes. So the Social Value Act, for example, where as part of procurement processes in public sector tendering, being able to evidence how you kind of are aligned with the Social Value Act, and you'll create opportunity if you're working in a disadvantaged community, how you'll create opportunities for people within those communities to get into the workforce. So this is a real strong driver for the construction industries, you know, where they've got to evidence things like that. So the motivations were different, but then when I'm talking to employers about how they overcome some of the challenges that put people off, again, there was some really important kind of learning points within that. Typically around not being too rigid in process. One of the kind of key things that I saw people doing this successfully is, you know, they might face initial challenges within their own organization about bringing someone in prior convictions into their organization, and HR might say, well, if they can't do a good application form or the CV is not good enough and stuff like that, then we can't choose them over somebody else that can kind of do that. And some of the participants spoke of resistance and how they kind of needed to overcome that. And one of the things is like, if you're asking for somebody with no work history to fill a CV out or to complete a CV, they've lost already. You know, you're making them either lie about the past or just walk away because
projects I'm involved across the board. I mean, it's not just by any means ex-offenders. So helping employers to understand that changing the recruitment policy to enable the person to shine, give them the opportunity to shine. But what advice would you give to employers about recruiting ex-offenders if they haven't stepped into that yet? And what support's available to them, and how do they go about assessing and managing potential risk? We talk about risk assessments these days and all the rest of it. What advice would you give?
So I think it's easy for for people that are not connected into the criminal justice system to have a false sense of risk and what risk is. And there's lots of language that can seem scary around risk and around people that have offended and people that have got previous convictions. But I think one of the key things for me that I'd encourage employers to do is just take a step back from language and things like that, and just ask yourself, if somebody's admitted that they've done this thing, what does that mean for your business? You know, where is the risk of that for your business? And understand it from kind of that perspective, because the situation that somebody might have committed a criminal offence in could be a very different type of situation to any situation they might find themselves within your workplace. So therefore, just the fact that the situations are different massively reduces any risk. But the way employers can perceive, some employers just can't perceive that kind of difference, and they're a bit too literal in how they understand kind of that risk to be. So I'd encourage people to just kind of use their own judgment really, but critically assess what it is that they're feeling nervous about and why, and then ask themselves the question, well, what can I do to make myself feel a little bit better about it? You know, rather than just saying, well, that's a no then. Just ask yourself, so what could I do? And there's what I found within my research is that people that had really quite entrenched criminal behaviours coming into a workplace, first of all, they needed to adjust to have the right attitude to work. You know, that's something that's done by buddying in role, not by attending a course. It's about somebody in that workplace role modelling and explaining to people why this is the etiquette here, or this is how we do things here, and this is why, and and just supporting people to make that adjustment really into kind of having the right attitude and understanding of what it means to be well within a kind of workplace. Investment in that, as well as investment in the kind of, and when I say investment, I mean kind of time really spent with people and sharing experience and kind of learning, rather than anything that requires financial investment. But yeah, investment in kind of that readiness to work alongside preparation for the particular role will just mean that you've got somebody that settles into your organisation much more effectively and is likely to stay there for much longer, because they will be more loyal, because you've given them a chance, and by giving somebody a chance, and it creates a sense of having something to lose. So when people find themselves in complicated situations in the future, having that something to lose that's important to them in the job, having the personal relationships with people that they trust within that workplace, these are all factors that mean it's easier to make a better decision, rather than pressing the sod it switch and reverting to past behaviours that have been so problematic in the past. But as employers, just being like intelligent in those areas and providing a bit more breathing room for people coming into the organisation, giving yourself a bit more breathing room about the processes that you use to bring people into the organisation, can mean that you've got people that are going to stick with you through thick and thin, because they're so grateful of the difference you're making in their lives over the longer term.
Yeah, I think from your research, that whole thing about the business benefits, those employers you spoke to that do actively recruit ex-offenders are seeing all sorts of strong benefits like loyalty, and trust, and giving somebody the opportunity makes a huge difference. And looking at some of your website videos, the transformational difference to people's lives. And you'd say a risk worth taking.
100%. So I won't preach this, Tony, without doing it myself. So I employ 40 people. I've got around 130 volunteers within my organisation as well.
That's great.
Out of my staffing team, over 60% have got lived experience of either addiction, prison, homelessness and rough sleeping, or mental ill health. And some of the people that we employ started off with us as service users, and have worked the kind of way through volunteering into employment, and then moving up through different roles. So I passionately believe that, and given the opportunity and the right support, people can thrive, and it doesn't mean to say everything's always going to be really smooth within that, because there's going to be hurdles that come in along the way. But just approaching this from a really human perspective is the best way with it to achieving kind of success. And there's I can think of one gentleman in particular that was able to buy Christmas presents for the first time for his kids while he was employed with us. And there's just kind of some little things that kind of stick with you, that make you aware as an employer that you're having a much broader impact on people's lives than what you might kind of recognise already.
Yeah. And in terms of, we talked at the beginning, didn't we, about the cost of reoffending, something like £18 billion, and that only 17% of ex-offenders are in employment, I think, within the first 12 months. If we can help improve that situation, and as you improve the situation for the clients you work with, what happens to reoffending? If I get into a job and I'm feeling comfortable in that job and supported in that job and part of a community, which I think is another big word for you, what happens to the reoffending rates?
Yeah, so for me, I can get on a soapbox really about where investment in the criminal justice system is misspent. You know, the amount of money that's put into prisons, but people don't change their life while they're in prison. You need to be released from prison and learn to live within the community in order to be able to have agency and kind of change your life. So for me, you know, creating an environment within the community where people that, you know, are on that journey are able to kind of build a roots within and be accepted within is essential to reduce reoffending, because once you've got that sense of belonging to something, you know, you don't want to lose it, because that's kind of what you're looking for throughout all the times that you're kind of troubled, and not finding it means you go back to where you are welcome, and that's with you kind of offending groups and stuff like that. So I really see that society and community as a whole as a much bigger a much bigger role in creating a sense of belonging for people that are on that journey, and doing what they can to create opportunities for people to get involved at kind of different levels within that. So obviously employment and accommodation is a huge part of offering somebody the stability within their day-to-day life that enables them to continue to build a wholesome, rich and happier and healthier life. The more people that are being involved in offending that have those opportunities, the safer communities become, because there's less people going back to reoffending. So I think some of the messaging isn't framed in the right way. You know, this is about, yes, we do good because we want to do good in what we do. But actually, you know, my view is it's a responsibility on us all to have a role in making our communities safer. And one of the ways that business owners can make our communities safer is by giving more people an opportunity to be employed. With that then comes support from other services or other sources that can make sure that, you know, that opportunity is taken advantage of and given the respect that it's kind of due from people, and people are equipped to kind of do that. But like I say, don't lose sight of the human the human element within that, is that people often are coming from places of trauma, you know, and sometimes there needs to be a bit more sensitivity and a bit more kind of emotional intelligence about how they're handled, and a bit more kind of allowance given really for smaller things that might not necessarily comply with how you'd expect an employee to behave within the work.
As you say, it's that induction period and getting people's expectations. They may not have left prison equipped, properly trained, if you like. You know, if you're spending time in prison, there's more that could be done, I'm sure, in the education system, preparing people to go into the world and to secure a job and to understand the thing. So requires on both sides, but the benefits are definitely there. Now, there's a number of employers are comfortable, obviously, considering people with what they might consider to be, should we say, low-level convictions, but they can react very differently to people with a record, say, of violent or sexual crime. What would you say to those employers in that sort of instance?
Again, kind of going back to the point that I made earlier, is kind of, you know, engaging in a conversation with the person. So, you know, for a working relationship to be a good, healthy working relationship, there needs to be trust within that. So setting out that expectation with somebody is a good thing to do, but then within that you're asking them, so tell me about the context around the situation where you got your conviction. Somebody might have committed a violent act in one situation that has absolutely no relevance to a workplace, you know, and understanding that can give you a little bit more confidence about knowing the person a little bit more, rather than just what you read from their application form or kind of any additional kind of submission. So having the conversation with them really to understand, so what went on there. Timpson's, they won't employ sex offenders, but they really favour murderers. And the reason for that is because the consequences of somebody who's released on life license are really severe. If there's any kind of step out of line, the consequences are huge. So just any kind of small misdemeanor thing can mean they have to go back to prison for a few years, So even though for some, or if you see that somebody's had a conviction for murder on their application form, that might absolutely terrify them. Simpsons go out of the way to find them people. And that's because they understand the context that that person's going to be living in the community around. There's going to be so much kind of close supervision that you're pretty much guaranteed that they're going to be fairly stable. They wouldn't have got to the point of release until everything was kind of met. But then also, most murders are committed in personal relationships, and so as long as nobody's in a relationship with that person, you can be pretty safe that they're not going to commit a violent act towards you. So there's an example there of how just getting that deeper context around what's gone on can inform you really around, okay, so what does this mean to my business and the workplace and my culture and the staff that I also employ that are going to come into contact with that person, and just be able to make your own judgment about whether you feel that there could be potential risk there, or actually there might be a bit of a risk, but you feel you can do stuff to manage it. So as a helpful tip, if the information that you get around someone's conviction indicates that the violent acts they'd committed was unprovoked, then that's a real risk you need to be factoring into your business, because you don't know what the trigger point is. But if it was situational within a very kind of fixed number of triggers, that as long as you're not going anywhere near those triggers, you're probably going to be all right. And I think being inquisitive to understand what those triggers may have been for somebody can give you then the confidence around the decision that you make, either to give somebody an opportunity or to really justify in a fair way why you won't give somebody an opportunity.
Yeah, and having that balance, having that thought process which doesn't just say no.
Yeah.
But I've got a sort of question here around the community sector when working in a situation dealing with vulnerable people and volunteers. How do you suggest approaching dealing with appropriate information? Who needs to know? What about people's prejudices? Because I'm sure there are. How do we advise on that?
So can you reframe the question, Tony?
Yeah, I think we've got one or two people here that work in community centre type settings, with volunteers in and amongst vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And how do we, as it were, take somebody on in that sort of setting with criminal convictions and manage the process of who needs to know what?
Yeah.
And the risk assessment. And I think you've talked obviously about risk. But also managing people's prejudice.
Yeah.
Or he's an ex-so-and-so, or he's a so-and-so, I can't have him in here, or her, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so the first part of the question then is that as part of your considerations around suitability for role is really looking at the role. So if somebody has got a previous conviction, that means that there's the potential for a risk that they may exploit somebody who has vulnerabilities, then it'd be a bit daft, wouldn't it, to put them in a role of support of somebody with vulnerabilities. But does that mean it'd be a bit daft in kind of asking them to kind of putting them in an administrative role? Answering the telephone, being a meet and greet, and something where there's not a kind of a relationship of support that can be exploited in some way. So thinking about the role is again how you can manage the potential risks around somebody. Most people appreciate that the challenges that they've had in their past are not communicated on their behalf. So somebody coming into a workplace, if So for me, if somebody thought I was employable,
loud halo,
leave me to have ownership of what I share.
Sure.
You know, obviously, if relevant people need to be aware of it, especially if we're asking for me to have some additional support to adjust into the workplace, relevant people have that information, but for it to be common knowledge is unfair on that individual kind of coming in, and it's harder for them to let go of the labels that we actually want to kind of shift. Yeah. If your culture is one where there is kind of attitudes and kind of people are stigmatized in some way, I think you've got a broader problem within your business, and that this group of people are just going to bear the brunt of it until somebody else is bearing the brunt of it, you know. So I think it kind of loses something else going on.
Okay, well, I think time-wise we're going to draw to a close, but something I picked up from your website, which I think was great, is that anybody can turn their life around with the right amount of support, grit and determination. Yeah. And you've demonstrated to us today how you've been through what you've been through, transformed your life, built a sizable business in a relatively short space of time, which is making a massive impact on many people who've had, again, difficult backgrounds. Yeah. And to think about the employers that you've met, you know, when you were doing your research at Cambridge, that are embracing ex-offenders, that are actually putting the support in place and reaping the benefits of loyalty, of determination, of all those skills you've had to develop, like resilience and persistence. Being a criminal requires quite a lot of skill. Yeah. If you can flip that and use it positively, which is what you're demonstrating, you've got some amazing potential employees. So hopefully today people are thinking about how they can reflect differently if it comes up in conversation or on a CV that, yes, I have had a conviction. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everybody for joining us. And next Tuesday lunchtime, we're going to focus on investing in a happy and healthy workplace. Happy and healthy people are more productive. More productive people are more profitable. What's not to like? So we'll be hearing from Vicky Lukins of Healthy Workplaces Gloucestershire. She's got some great resources to help your business to have even happier people and happier colleagues. I mentioned Inclusivity Works in the introduction. You can find out more about Inclusivity Works either through our website, inclusivityworks.org, or through contacting me or my colleague Sue Gilding, or joining our LinkedIn page. Lots of different resources. As I mentioned to Peter, we'll be sending a summary of the session and the key points that Peter's highlighted today to you, some top tips, and a full recording of this session is available, or will be available, on the Inclusivity Works website at the beginning of March. And please, if I may ask, and when you get the email from us with the top tips, an opportunity to sign up for the newsletter, the Inclusivity Works newsletter, packed full of interesting stuff. So we do hope you'll do that. Together, we want to make Gloucestershire a beacon for inclusivity, for diversity and inclusion. In a moment, as we close, I understand there's going to be a short survey that's going to pop up. It's only 2 or 3 questions, will take you no more than 30 seconds, I guarantee that. If you could spend a moment completing that survey, we would be very grateful. So all that's left for me to do on behalf of Peter at Community Led Initiatives UK and the whole GEM team is to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.